I'm going to try another bit of offset turning now.
I've got a bit of really dry sycamore, so I'm just going to turn this around, and then the plan is to do some offset turning by adjusting the position of the workpiece in the chuck and moving it off centre, and then might do some colouring at the end once I've got it sorted out. I don't know yet. Right, I'm just using a parting tool to put a tenon on the end, and I'm just going to run a line across at 90-degree intervals around the cylinder so that when I adjust it I know where I am for each of the turns. So first off, I'm going to form the goblet, slightly thistle, I think that's the right term, thistle shaped top to the goblet. Now I've got the approximate shape of the outside of the goblet sorted out, I'm just going to measure up and take out the centre of the bowl, using some Forstner bits to start with just to make life easier. And now start off shaping the inside using a spindle gouge to start with. Doing some push and pull cuts, getting a bit of vibration from the tool, possibly because I thinned the neck of the goblet down probably before I should have done this earlier on whilst there was more meat to keep the workpiece stiffer. So after I got some of the main step out from the inside where the Forstner bits were, now I can use a negative rake scraper to get the profile on the inside. So I've sanded off the inside of the goblet, and that's pretty well done, ready for final finishing. So I've now put the tennis ball in between the tailstock and the finished goblet on the inside. That provides a very effective support for the piece whilst I do the rest of the main shaping around, start the chuck jaws and do the off-centre piece. Although nearly all the pencil marks had been turned away, I still had a bit down there at the foot to work with. So I've numbered the marks, the 90-degree marks, 1, 2, 3, 4, so I can figure out which is which. And I'm just moving one of them about 3mm off centre so that we get a good wobble. So after the chuck jaws have been well and truly tightened up, it's time to start turning the first bead and cove with a spindle gouge. And you've got to be careful doing this, make sure the tool rest doesn't bang against the workpiece, and also get used to the fact that when you go in with your spindle gouge, the tool will be being kicked around a bit, because as you can see from the ghost on that image, there's quite a bit of air that you've got to cut to start with. I've turned the main stem down to about 15mm, and so each of the cuts now has got to cut down to that same thickness of stem for each of the beads. As you cut down each of the offset beads, it will meet the previous section of shaft that you've turned, and you need to blend it in gently with the tool and afterwards with the sandpaper, so that you get a nice smooth transition. Just now going in initially with a spindle gouge, creating the cove between this bead and the bead next to it, and trimming it off so that you get a completely turned shape. To start with, you'll find that there's remnants of the cylinder from the original shaping left, and you have to keep going with the forming of that cove until you've actually got a completely turned bead. I discovered that it was easier after some initial shaping to use a parting tool to cut down between the two beads to open up the space, making it easier to get the spindle gouge in, and also to take it down to the depth that you need to for the spindle shaft to be the same diameter on each of those offset turning areas. You can see here as it slows down that there's still some of the cylinder left, a flat spot on the top, which means that I've still got to keep going to turn it down more. Turn away all of the ghost that you can see on this. It's a bit easier to see actually on the camera than it is in reality. You need to turn away all of the ghost on each bead and sweep it down gently and blend it into the previous cut. As things get a bit tighter in there, I've swapped over to a 1/4 inch spindle gouge just to get in and dress the detail. Right, that's that one finished. I'm using the abrasive now just to blend in the shape of the cove to the previously turned area. It's quite important that you do this because otherwise you get quite a jaggedy finish. So that's all sanded up. Time now to reset the offset I think I'm going to move it round about 180 degrees and reset that to, again, about 3mm out of the jaws. So this is the same as before, using the spindle gouge and plunging in with the parting tool to get the depth so that you know where the spindle is that you're aiming at. Using the spindle gouge to reduce the ghost on this bead, getting rid of the flat spot on the top of the cylinder and blending it in down to the previously cut shaft area. And then the same as before, sand it up and then reset the chuck jaws to the next 90-degree offset, and again pull it out about 3mm or so, trying to keep it consistent, and then, as I say, rinse and repeat. And then on to the last section, just turning that last bead down and blending it in. With the last offset area sanded and blended in, I'm now resetting it so that it's square again, and we'll again go in with the abrasive to just blend in those areas of the stem that are parallel and straight. I did decide when I was looking at it with the abrasive paper that it really needed a little bit more blending in near the base of the stem, so I've got the small spindle gouge out and just touching it up top and bottom just to blend in those offset cuts.
Okay, that's the bulk of it done. It's sanded, and I think I've got into all the little grooves just about. It's a very plain wood, so I think I'm now going to ebonize it and colour it. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I'm going to apply a bit of colour. I've had a couple of coats of chestnut ebonising lacquer on, and I'm going to use some of the Daler-Rowney interference colours. I've got a little dollop of blue here, and I'm going to try the sort of dry brush sort of approach and just put it on very gently and see what this sort of does. I'm just sort of brushing it on in one direction and just sort of streaking it on a bit with very little paint on. like that sort of effect. Just little tiny bits. Doing it all in one direction to sort of get a slight bit of texturing effect.
So just continue on down through the shaft and round the base, leaving space between the brush strokes for the next colour, because I want to put a variety of colours, build up the layers.
Okay, so this is now a bit of Dale Rowney shimmering red. Really don't need very much. These tubes are going to last me out, I think. What I'm going to try this time is I'm going to try a little bit of sponge work on it, just to create a sort of different texture.
I've decided I'm going to put some streaky interference gold on the inside of the goblet whilst the outside dries ready for the next colour. So I've just got a fairly dry brush with a bit of the paint and just gently sort of applying it in a streaky fashion. Unfortunately, the goblet has moved slightly and is no longer totally true, so I'm not getting completely even streak marks on the inside. So I have to do a bit of handwork to actually compensate, unfortunately. Stewart Furini, eat your heart out. And now the outside is dried, I can speckle in some gold infill just to blend in over some of the darker areas. After applying the gold, a lot of the highlights had sort of diminished a bit, so I thought I'd just open up the colour box, and I've got a bit of Inca gold pot there, copper, and again it's quite dry, so again using the dry brush technique, just sort of blush on a little bit of extra colour, just sort of adding a bit of a highlight. I want to try and make it look a bit like Venetian glass. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, don't know, but it's okay. So I'm not adding a lot, just a little gentle rub on with a dry brush, just to sort of bring up the highlights a little bit. And then I thought, well, the inside, the goldy look, looked a bit sort of bland compared to the outside, so I thought it needed a little bit of highlighting. So I'm just again brushing some bits on of the copper, just to sort of bring it to life a bit more. And then, well, the paint box was sitting there behind me. I thought it would be, sort of inappropriate of me to just ignore all those colours. So I've got the Inca Gold fluorescent blue colour out, which is just there again, just doing a few highlights, just adding a bit of extra depth and texture in the colour. Well, at that point I have put the colours away. I want to just now bring up a few little areas of wood so you can see it. So I just sanded a bit of the paint back on the rim, just so you get a little wooden rim, which I thought would be quite nice. And then it will be lacquered up in a minute, so that'll be sorted out. And then I thought I'll do some line marks on the base, again, just to bring out the fact that it's wood. So I've let it all dry for quite a while, and then I'm just using some 600 sandpaper just to smooth back the layers of paint a little before I put on 3 or 4 coats of acrylic gloss chestnut lacquer. And after that I put it on the buffing wheel system with a bit of Canova to give it a really good shine. So there we have it. Ideally I'd have done this to be a lot slimmer, with the stem being more delicate, but it was a test piece and it was a bit of fun, so there it is. What do you think?